there, this is Cassie over at First Call Digital Agency, and today, as part of our series of digital fit tips, we wanted to cover brand books and some things that you might want to consider including in yours. If you enjoy this content and want to see more like it, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button below or leave a comment. Brand books can be as simple or as complex as you really need them to be in order to ensure that your brand remains consistent. And it extends beyond things like logos, font stylings, or color schemes. It can also help standardize expectations for tone of voice, as well as line heights and other details that you may not realize are impacting the quality of your brand in the long term. So today we wanted to run through an example brand guide that we feel will help give some visuals and some key elements that you might want to include in your future brand guides. Do you even need a brand book? That is a very valid question. As a budding company, you may not feel like you need to step outside of anything beyond just logo consistency. But as your company grows, it is very important to set standards and expectations for ongoing marketing materials so that you can keep that brand consistent and people will begin to recognize and relate to your company. I'm going to run through an example brand guide with you guys to show you some of the things that we have found have been essential components of a good brand guide. Now, whether you have an existing one that you would like to add some details to, or you're just trying to build one out right now, I think you'll find this video really helpful to lay out the parameters of some of the things you should be considering. So let's get started. This is just a simple cover, just to give an impression of some of the aspects of a brand that might be included, things like logo, and then a quick glance at some of the font styling and color schemes. So we also like to include a table of contents to give a clear expectation of some of where and how you're going to find some of the details. As always, one of the first things people do is they go ahead and get the logo mocked up so that they have that real strong brand foundation in the logo. And this is an opportunity we have to just show a couple options on how that logo can be used. For logo consistency, you do want to consider how the logo is going to be used, whether it's a dark background or a light background, and if you're going to allow different variations of the logo to exist. This is really important because if you allow a white version of the logo, you need to set parameters on when that is allowed to be used. We don't want, as far as people trying to define what your brand looks like, to have several options online when they're trying to find you and relate. Color palettes take a lot of refinement, and one of the things that we have found as both marketers and web developers is that sometimes a color looks really fantastic in a small dose, but does not look really good when you try to incorporate it in large swaths across a site. So it's really important when developing your color palettes to have more neutral colors that you can use in big areas, and then the more accent colors that can be brighter or more dynamic that you will use more subtly. Another thing to factor in when you're developing a color palette is the tone that you're trying to enforce when you are thinking of your brand. And we'll get more into tone and voice in a minute, but you don't want to choose colors that don't really align with your target audience. If they're going after more of a calm environment, such as this color palette, we're not going to want to use loud colors. Now that may seem obvious, but sometimes a color that appears very neutral in a small dose can become very arrogant when used in larger parts across the web. One thing that we don't often see incorporated into really standard brand books is a core message, and core messaging is a really important piece of helping to define basically your mission, but your mission as it relates to the customer. So this is a really simple prompt question to help you kind of get thinking about how you would define your core message. And so basically, what is the message you're trying to convey to clients that cuts to the core of their problem and also reflects how you help them resolve it in a unique and specific way. So you're really trying to distinguish yourself from your competitors with this core message, but also it's not really about you, it's about how you help the client. A hero statement is essentially a storytelling style that you can use across some of your pages to help define the hero, the villain, and the wizard. And so this links into the story brand concepts, which are really helpful for developing copy. And this type of brand book element can help with copywriters and social media people to understand how they will structure storytelling devices throughout their campaigns. So the hero obviously is the buyer, but this can deviate in a couple different ways depending on how many buyer personas you have. The villain is their primary struggle, and an important thing to consider when defining a villain is what's the actual problem? Because sometimes we can focus on what we think is the problem and not what the actual problem is. And as an example, the one that I typically like to use is that when people are shopping around for a contractor of some sort, a lot of contractors are going to say that they have a ton of experience, and they think that that is what is going to drive the purchase. But in actuality, most contractors have a lot of experience. It doesn't really separate you from your competitors. And on the same note, that's not really the problem that the client's trying to solve. The main struggle that they're having is they need to have a very specific, let's say that you were niched into restoration for historic homes, then that's the struggle they're having. They can't just hire any contractor, they have to hire a contractor that can help them restore a historic home. So what's the actual problem that they're having? And then write about that. And then you serve as the wizard in that you are particularly suited to help them with their problem. And the more closely you can speak to that problem, the more likely they are to want to buy from you. Just like how the hero statement helps structure your brand in a concept of a storytelling device, tone is really important for making sure that all of your copywriters and social media, emails, newsletters, all of these are unified under a similar tone. So you want your brand to have a feeling like it's coming from the same person consistently. You don't want to have wildly different writing styles across all of these different platforms because it's not really providing that consistency that you want from a recognizable brand. So this is a helpful device to hand over to your different vendors or internal resources so that they know the tone that you're going after. Aside from this, voice is a good example of how you can actually write out different ways you would use that tone. Like how would you actually represent that tone in writing? So voice is a good way to incorporate this into your brand. Typography is pretty clear cut, and just like color palettes, it takes some work and some testing and just a bunch of mock-ups to try and get it right. And just like with color palettes, you want to choose font styles that are really going to relate to the tone and emotions that you want people to feel when they visit your website or read anything from social media. And there's so many resources online on how to choose accurate typography, so I'm not going to really dive into this one right now. Some people, want all sans serif. Some people want sans. It's really just a lot of testing and back and forth to try and get them to the place that you want. And just like with color palettes, it's really good to test them in print and in web to make sure you're getting them just right. Applied typography just gives you an example of how these different font styles are going to work together. So from a web standpoint, you need to remember that you typically need 3 different variations of font styles because you are going to want a primary header, a subheader, and then body font. This is also another good opportunity to represent any accent fonts that you might want to use if you want to emphasize any points throughout the copy on your website. This one is a really important one if you want to have consistency on a website for long term. So initial build outs often show a lot of consistency in styling because they were built by one developer, and so they set all the parameters and you're good to go. But over a few years of having different developers work on a website, or maybe having internal resources make changes, what you wind up with is variations in spacing and font, variations in spacing in like different modules, and it creates inconsistency across your website, especially if your website is continuing to expand and you're adding new content daily. You want to make sure you set parameters for spacing well. So you want to set line heights and margin widths across the web. And this will save you so much work in the long run. Same plays true for tablets and mobile. You always want to test your website on multiple devices. Even if the platform you're working in says it's responsive, don't rely on it. Test your website and then make sure you set those ratios clear in your brand book so that any web developer you work with in the future knows what the standards are. Don't want to leave them in the Wild West of just making it up as they go along. And then here is more of a written out version of what those spacing types can look like. And there's different expectations, and this all harkens back to that tone and style and what are you really trying to visually achieve as you build out a website or do any of these marketing materials. Do you want to feel big and open? Do you want to feel dynamic and exciting? Setting these spacing widths seems tedious, but it is going to really solidify that brand in the long run. So logos need to have expectations of the different variations you can use. For example, in this version we have a white font with white logo, or we have a white font with black logo, and just making it clear what can be used when and how. So that people are not creating and generating random versions of your logo just to suit whatever design they want. I didn't plug in any actual examples in the sticker sheet, but I do have some highlights of things you can include in a sticker sheet. So things like icon weight, formatting for graphics as an example if you want to put different styling around images across your website. Button styling is a big one because they can get a bunch of variations of different buttons, and also how you want animation elements to interact. Do you want certain things to move on a page? And a lot of this plays into web builds, but it can also factor into how you do layouts and designs for your social media campaigns as well. If you have a certain template you need to use for social, you want to make sure you include those details here. And again, this is both for an internal marketing person, just so you can remember what parameters you set up, but also if you're working with a bunch of vendors to coordinate all of your marketing campaigns, we don't want any of them to just feel like they have free reign to make it up as they go along. And also it helps them to make sure that they're representing your brand well. Graphic elements are really important to include, and these are things that can either be built out by a graphic designer or maybe standards for colors that need to be included in stock photos. And this is just an example of where you can plug in some of these styles of different images so that they can have reference points if they're looking for an image to include in a campaign of what has worked in the past and what they should be trying to emulate. And here's another couple examples of a consistency with different graphic elements. These are cartoon and styling, but you can see that they have a consistent color, they have a consistent art style, and that's really what you're wanting to define for people moving forward so they know what to look for. And that's it. I mean, it's like a lot of things, but setting this up ahead of time will save you a lot of headache in the long run. So, we walked through all the different elements, and some of you may have not thought about including in your brand book. Of course, logos, fonts, colors, very important, but some elements that we often see are missing is tone, voice, parameters for margins and font height, and line weight, and then also things like sticker sheets. These can evolve over time, but you really want to get them set so that as you work with other vendors or as your campaigns develop, that you have no question about what the expectation is. Awesome. Well, thanks for walking through this whole brand book journey with me. I hope that you found some of this really helpful. And if you want to see more videos like this, I am looking forward to doing another one for you. But go ahead and hit like and subscribe below and look for more great content. Thanks.